with COVID and everything, and being, is it online school or distance school? Is there a
Uh,
distinct?
there's not really in BC. So in British Columbia, online school is, in and of its nature, online school is distance learning. Like
Right,
there's no old school correspondence courses anymore. So
right,
if you are doing distance learning, you're with an online school,
right.
essentially.
So how was like with COVID and everything like that? How did that affect you guys compared to how all the stories you hear, whether it's from like California, whether it's Canada, like what's the difference for you guys?
Yeah, so well, we've been growing steadily. I think it's kind of one of those online schools are definitely word of mouth because they're, not necessarily, at least for our school, we're not necessarily the first choice. Like something's not working about school, so now you're going to seek the alternative, and we're definitely an alternative school.
Right.
So we really have the last couple of years, there's been an increase in parent inquiry, which has been pretty steady, which is exciting.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit, and it just kind of kept amping up. So like, May was a little busier than normal with inquiries, and June and July, and then we hit August, and I think parents, because the Ministry of Education was kind of, reasonably enough not sure what school was going to look like in September, parents were like, okay, we got to figure this out. So we went from what would normally in August be, 15 inquiries maybe through our website and some phone calls. We went from like 15 to like 500. So yeah, it was like, okay, we gotta think about this a little bit more. We gotta get on our game because
Right.
we had to put new systems in place and figure out how to like deal with this many extra people who were wanting enrollment. So
Right.
it was intense.
So it kind of worked out.
Yeah, that's another COVID win. We've grown. And hopefully in a semi-sustainably way. I mean, we know a lot of parents are reacting to the pandemic for their own reasons. But hopefully some of those parents were, we tried to kind of screen for the people who wanted what we were offering versus just like the panickers who
Right. Hitting the panic button and not.
not really thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
How so you went from 15 to 500 inquiries. How many did you end up? Did you accept all 500?
No, that
No.
was not a thing. That was we could hire enough people to deal with that. So I think in the end, when the dust settled, we enrolled 150 students,
Okay.
and that is to date our biggest ever enrollment for September.
Right.
And we hired 7 new teachers, so that again, to date, probably the biggest hiring we've ever done in one shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was, and again, that was conservative. Like we could have tried to hire like 20 teachers and accommodate like 400 new students, but that didn't really seem sustainable
Right.
or anything short of complete insanity. So we really tried to be like, I have an old colleague who used to say, plan with a means to continue.
Yeah.
And that's sort of always been my mantra, like, okay, whatever we're doing, let's plan it with a means to continue. So enrolling 400 or 700 new students would have been nutso. Like
Right.
there's no way we could have sustained that. So
Is that
we
is
did
that
grow.
is that across the board? I assume that'd be across the board.
For other,
Like for other distance learners.
oh yeah, absolutely. We had conversations with the Ministry of Ed actually
Yeah.
in August, and they were like, we kind of have a sense that you guys are getting like slammed, and how much do you think you can grow?
Yeah. And you're like, you think?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it was definitely one of those moments where you're like, yeah, yep, that's correct. Thanks for noticing.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Do other schools, like traditional schools in class, are they turning to you? Because like in California, schools are just like for over the past however many months, everyone I talk to is just like, we don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going to look like in
Yeah.
October. You know, it feels like it's steadied out a bit, but like, is everyone coming to you? I feel like everyone would be coming to you guys.
Yeah, so it was interesting because lockdown in BC, as you know, happened like simultaneous with March break starting.
Right.
So the 17th of March or whatever it was official, like we're in lockdown.
Right.
And so normally I have 2 weeks off in March to kind of catch up on emails and
Yeah.
go to yoga and do all the things I do. And instead, I spent most of my first 2 weeks of lockdown during March break attending meetings with the Ministry of Ed, attending meetings with other schools in BC who were trying to figure out how do we do this. So there was a call made to me that first week and a couple of other online schools saying like, hey, would you be willing to attend this meeting and talk to other schools about maybe how to go about starting the process of moving their classes to online? So
Right.
yeah, there was definitely a sense of like looking to online schools to sort of ask for advice and like where do we start and how does this work and what does it look like for you? So
Right.
yeah, there were a lot of meetings, a lot of meetings
Well,
during.
what does the structure look like?
Yeah, so it's pretty asynchronous, and I think that was the biggest myth that we had to dispel. A lot of regular, and for so we would call we're an online school,
Hmm.
and we would call a regular quote unquote regular school
Yeah.
a brick and mortar school. Like that's the terminology.
Okay.
So there was a lot of thinking from brick and mortar colleagues of just like, hey, so we're just gonna business as usual, but instead of the classroom, the teacher's going to be in front of the computer screen on Zoom, and all of the students are just going to be in their home on Zoom
Right.
taking regular classes for 6 hours a day. And all of us who work in the online world were like, whoa, like maybe not. Like that's, yeah, because that's really hard. I mean, and I think the entire world now would agree sitting in front of a computer screen on Zoom and
Hmm.
maintaining focus and attention is exhausting. Like you
Right.
can do it for like short periods of time, but to do it all day, every day,
Right.
like that's a recipe for burning out and
Yeah.
disaster kind of thing. So we kind of like cautioned our colleagues in brick and mortar to just be like, one of the things we said over and over again was whatever your expectations are or your ideas are, cut them in half and then cut them in half again.
Expectations of the students?
And just what
Or
it's going to look like.
oh, okay. Right.
So if you think you're going to sit in front of your students on Zoom for 6 hours a
Yeah.
day,
Right.
teaching like you would in a classroom, like cut that in half and then cut it in half again. So you're really looking at, if you're lucky, you're going to get an hour to an hour and a half out of your students in an online fashion, and the rest of it really needs to be, self-directed or parent-guided self-directed as it can be.
Right.
And so that's kind of how our classes work. Like students definitely get that face-to-face time with teachers as it is appropriate, but it's not like, you're logging in on Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. and you're sitting in math class for an hour and then science class for an hour, and then, it just, that isn't sustainable. Like people will burn out. So
Right.
and that's kind of the lovely thing about online school is that a student is doing their school, but there's no homework after. Like your school is your school.
Right.
So that's one of the big questions we get often is, well, what about homework? And it's like, well, yeah, there's no homework. Like your work
Okay.
is your work.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because you sit in a class and you have the lesson and you do whatever you're doing in class, and then they're like, oh, here's your homework assignment. But that really, there's no room for that in online schooling because you're learning and you're doing, and
Yeah.
like there's no homework because it's all homework, right?
Right. So what does that look like? So if you're saying, an hour, maybe 2 hours of doing instructing, like through Zoom, through Google Meet, through just online. What does that look like for? So, for example, not only parents who are at home are maybe working from home, or the example, just because I talk to teachers all the time, there's teachers who are teaching and they also have kids. So now, so what are they doing with the rest of the day? If you're saying an hour or two, like
Well, that would be like direct instruction, like face to face.
Okay.
Right? So essentially, if you can imagine like logging into a virtual classroom
Yeah.
and looking at, my teacher has assigned, and in our context, it's like, the subjects are listed, and you click on the subject, and then it opens up and it shows you like, week September 9th to whatever, these are your lessons, and you click on the lessons, and you kind of it would be like a virtual textbook kind of.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Right.
So then,
So
and
that's
then
what they're working on.
that's what they're working on. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. What about for schools that are like traditionally, and maybe it just doesn't work, and if it just doesn't work anymore, say that. But for maybe a high school student who typically has 4 classes a day, or 3 classes a day, is there a way around it then? Do you think? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, the great thing about the self-directed piece, the asynchronous part of online learning, is that you're not locked into a schedule the same way that you are if you go to a classroom. So
Right.
if you're a high school student and you go to school, you've got block A, block whatever, you've got day 1, day 2, whatever your school schedule is, and you've got your 4 classes per day that you have to rotate through. For our students, they can kind of focus on, like today I'm going to do, 2 lessons in math and 2 lessons in language arts.
Oh, I see.
And then tomorrow I might do 3 or 4 lessons in social studies because I'm on a roll. Like there's not that,
Interesting.
like it's a little bit more, it's a lot more flexible in how you tackle it because you're not locked in. Now that's not to say my school is representative of all online schools. There are some schools in BC at least that require students to log into their virtual classroom at a certain time every
Okay.
day
Right.
and do their work between this hour and this hour. So there are, and that's, I think the nice thing about having so many different online schools in BC is that you can kind of pick the one that works for you and your learner.
I see.
Yeah, so some parents want to be super involved with the process, and some parents want to be kind of hands off and like,
Right.
the school's got this, and you're going to let me know if my kiddo's not keeping up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So how did you end up as executive director of Kleos Open Learning? Maybe first the question is like, what exactly does Kleos do or provide, and then the story of day one to now.
Day one.
October
And
2020.
yeah, so Kleos is an online school that we really look at individual learners. So we really try to, it's not just like, here's your boxed curriculum, here's your boxed program.
Okay.
It's not a one size fits all. We really believe that every student is a unique individual learner. We also believe that learning really has to start with relationship. So two of our taglines, as cheesy as it is, but they've kind of stuck. One is that like, learning begins with a relationship. And the other tagline that we have is that your child is one of a kind, not one of many. So we really use, and again, those have stuck over the years, even though they're kind of cheesy in a way.
Yeah, no, they're great.
But they've stuck because they're true.
Yeah.
So we really look at that relationship building between teachers and parents and administrators and students, as well as the fact that everybody learns in their own unique way. And so some of our students, you can give them pretty standard curriculum and they're going to run with it, and then other students really need a unique approach to learning. So we've honed that skill of kind of figuring that out. I call it educational forensics. You know, you're kind of like, okay, so here's a kid and on paper they're this, but then you start to kind of like dig into who they really are, and you see what works and what doesn't work, and you can kind of then create a really customized program that's meeting their individual needs.
Cool.
So that's who Kleos is, really.
And really quick, so do you feel that now, like you guys must be thriving, especially with that approach, because that lack of relationship, lack of connection is something that I think a lot of teachers in, you know, brick and mortar schools are really concerned about losing. You know,
Yeah.
like we did a survey, and a huge number were concerned about like social emotional development, and you
Yeah.
know, and the, you know, the barriers that there are with COVID and online learning. But you're saying that you guys put that forward. How do you do that, and what's the result today, do you think?
Well, I think like always from the beginning, because, and again, there's that saying that where your intention goes, energy flows, which sounds super hippy dippy, but we've always put that relationship piece as the center of who we are. And so we kind of didn't allow the online part, the asynchronous distance, to infiltrate our belief about what we could do. So we've always believed that there's a way to create relationship regardless of whether that student is directly in front of you or they're through a screen, or you're really only getting to know them through their parent who is on the phone call with you or the email. And that has proved to be really true. Like, you know, I will say to new team members when they join, like, we're a tenacious bunch. We don't take no for an answer, and we don't take the first obstacle that comes our way as like, oh, well, you know, there's the barrier, there's the roadblock. Like, it's like, okay, there's a barrier, but there's a way to get around it.
Yeah.
And so we really just keep working to get to know our students. And I have to say, it's amazing to watch relationship develop between teachers and students, and then maybe the support people that are in place and parents, even though there's a distance. Like, it doesn't make sense on paper.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense in a world where we're used to interacting, you know, directly with people.
It doesn't make sense to a lot of people right now.
Yeah, it doesn't, but it is 100% possible, and that has nothing to do, for us, that has nothing to do with COVID.
Right.
Like, this is who we've been for the last 12 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So 12 years. So what's the story? What's the Kleos story? Day one to now.
Well, okay, number one, my own child. I think that idea that necessity is the mother of all invention. My oldest son is on the autism spectrum. He's almost 22 now. But school was a struggle from day one. Like, he loved preschool because you could play, and then as soon as it was kindergarten and you had to sit at a desk for even any amount of time and write, you know, your name on everything, he was just annoyed by the whole process. And so we knew that something was going on with him. It took a while for a diagnosis to come, probably because, you know, 20 some years ago it was harder to diagnose, and he is incredibly intellectually gifted, but it's all the other stuff that's a deficit. Like, the social emotional development for him is the challenge. Right. So he wasn't immediately identified as a kiddo who might have a challenge. Right. But we knew from a really early age that he was struggling, and so we pulled him from school at the end of grade 1 and reluctantly homeschooled him, which is proper homeschooling, where you're just like a parent at home doing the teaching and there's no support. And then the opportunity to be part of an online distributed learning is the technical term for it in BC, came along, and we my Ethan's dad was working for an independent school at the time, and so we kind of were like, hey, what if we started our own independent online school? Right. Which seemed like the craziest thing in the entire world, but that's exactly what we did. We started Kleos because we weren't finding a place for him to fit that also fit us. Like we weren't homeschoolers. We weren't like those homespun people who wanted to like do all of the things for their kid. We
Yeah.
wanted teacher guidance and accountability to the Ministry of Education without compromising his education or having all the pressure be on us. So that's kind of where Kleos kind of grew out of,
Right.
this idea that there could be a hybrid of something between, brick and mortar proper and then like the old school homeschooling model, which didn't fit for us at all. So that's, yeah, it was like a crazy thing that we just did. And here we are. I was actually I was a parent, I was a volunteer sort of parent liaison in the beginning.
Yep.
And then I was teaching for a year and a bit, kind of art and drama in a halftime program. And then, like I think my second or third year in, maybe it was like, oh hey, do you want to run the special ed department? And I was like, like me. And they were like, well, you have the most experience, and I did, because I had a child on the spectrum. I was
Right.
that for several years, and then 6 years ago, 6-ish, 7-ish years ago, the the head of school was like, hey, I think it's time for you to take the reins. And I was like, I was like,
Right. Looking around.
yeah, are you sure? Are you talking to me? And so, yeah, I got thrown in the deep end every time. That's kind of my story with Kleos, is like, jump into the deep end. The
Yeah.
water's fine. You'll figure out how to swim. And yeah, here I
And
am.
and really quick again on why they felt you were the person for the job.
Um, Well, I had been with the school for a number of years, and so I had a really great scope of the full practice of the school.
Yeah.
And because the school was growing in special education, in particular, students with on the autism spectrum make up the majority of our students, not by design, but just that's where we grew,
Right.
because it can be a very word of mouth thing. I kind of had the most experience in looking at the big picture of the school because I'd been there the longest.
Right.
Yeah. So essentially, and and then I was like, oh, I'm actually really good at this. That's weird.
Right.
I just was a stay-at-home mom for 11 years, and now I'm,
Executive director.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so but like what do you think of COVID? Do you think this is gonna do you think it's gonna go away? What do you like?
I don't think it's going to go away. I think we're in for another year probably.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-boggling to think that, in another month, November, December-ish, we were just starting to hear about COVID a year ago.
Yeah.
And I remember, I traveled a lot for work last year, November to March when we got locked down, for the Ministry of Ed and for the school and for a bunch of like committees that I was on. And I remember traveling in early February and being like, should I be worried about this? Like, nah, it's
Yeah.
not a thing. It's in China. And then like literally 6 weeks later, we're on lockdown. So yeah, I think we're in for a little bit of a long haul. I don't think it's just going to disappear. I think if we take a page from history, the pandemic in 1918, the Spanish flu, the second wave came and it was harsher than the first. And I think that might be because people were like kind of maybe lax about it the second wave. They were like, the flu's been through, we're good. I think the one thing that's our saving grace, but also maybe our worst enemy, is the fact that the media is so on top of it.
Yeah.
Like we have information at our fingertips now. So in one way that's great, but in another way I think it's also hard to know what to believe when
Yeah.
you're reading media right now. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
What do you think of the so let's go both ways. There's online schools and there's brick and mortar schools. How do you think either or are going to have to adapt. If so, maybe not so much for online schools. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so much for online schools. I think, even, we for us, the lockdown was kind of business as usual. I
Yeah.
mean, the one accommodation we had to make was for the fact that, students were maybe a little more anxious and families were more anxious, as well as the fact that now suddenly you have, mom and dad at home trying to work while their kids are home. So there, we had to make some adjustments to our expectations, but it wasn't drastic compared to what I think a brick and mortar school would have to adjust for.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be an ongoing thing.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think they should do as a non brick and mortar school?
As a non-brick and mortar school,
Casting opinions.
honestly, I think just be really kind to yourself. And maybe this is me just being overly positive, but education is cylindrical. So, you introduce a concept in grade 1, you revisit it in grade 3 or grade 4, you revisit it, like it's very much built upon itself. So, this idea that hours lost in a classroom for a week, a month, 6 months is like, oh, all is lost, the child is never going to graduate and get a job, isn't really realistic. And I can say that because a lot of our students, especially the ones who are struggling in school because they have a learning disability or struggling because they have, an emotional dysregulation disorder or whatever the case may be, most students come to us having missed large chunks of their schooling because being in the classroom was too difficult. And there's often this sense of like, oh my gosh, like this is a disaster and they've missed this much time and how are we going to get them back on track? And it's like, there is that's not actually a thing. Like you can figure out where a child is at academically and you can catch them up.
Yeah.
The problem with a classroom, I think, is, and this is, where we're locked into thinking, is that a classroom keeps moving forward and they don't stop and pause and like make sure that everybody's with them. They just keep kind of moving forward like a freight train.
Yeah.
To a degree.
Yeah. They kind of. What do you think? Because they kind of have to.
They kind of have to,
especially grade 11 and 12, right? Where, there's pressure from, the parents and the teachers have like goals that they need to meet for the rest of the class.
Yeah.
Like, what do you? Yeah. What do you do about that?
Yeah, that is the tricky part. So for us, it's like because it's more individual and we're like looking at each student as a specific, individual, we're able to really figure out, like if a kid is struggling, we're not just going to let them struggle. We're going to try and figure out like where and why. Like if they're struggling in math, well, what parts of math are they struggling with? Because then we can pause and, support that piece so that they can then move forward successfully, rather than what happens in a classroom often is that like it just keeps moving.
Right.
And then they're just like they're in the dust, right?
So do you guys have a typical, like, are you guys September to June? Because if something, a student gets behind or whatnot, how does that, like what does that timeline look like if everyone needs to go in June?
Well, so for us, we have a 2-week time frame that we look at. So if a student is falling behind and they're like not submitting assignments in they're 2 weeks behind, let's say, then we go like, oh, something's up.
Gotcha. Okay. The
flags go up. Like that's our first flag.
Right.
And then we have a pretty robust school-based team that meets on a bi-weekly basis. So if for some reason a student, especially a new student or even an existing student who might have been trucking along kind of like normal, and then suddenly there's a blip and we're like, oh, we're not getting assignments, like what could be going on? And then that conversation starts, right? So that we don't let it become this thing that then is so big that we can't.
Snowball.
Yeah. We try really hard not to.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Where so you said 12 years? Kleos has been around for 12 years, is that what you said?
Kleos proper has been around for, yeah, 10 to 12 years.
10 to 12 years. So how many students did you have like year one, two, three, and yeah, and then how did it grow? Where did you see the growth? You said it was word of mouth.
Yeah, a lot of it has been word of mouth. I would say we started out with around, we hovered for the first probably 6 years between 100 and 150 students, and kind of just like hovered there. And then really it started to take off from there, and it's been a really steady growth since then. And again, by no means are we a big school. Like, we
Yeah.
are small potatoes in not just BC, but like in the online world. There's some really big schools that grew in the beginning and just kind of like, gathered thousands of families. And
Right.
it's interesting in this world that seems like a good thing, right? Like, grow, we honor growth. We're like, "Ooh, you're amazing, look how big you are."
Yeah.
But for us, we really wanted to create this like slow, sustainable, conscientious growth, because there are, you get to a certain size where you got like 1,000 or 4,000 students. Well, suddenly you're just a machine that these are numbers, right? And
Okay.
for us, it's really important that we still have a very connected relationship, to bring it back
Yeah.
to that,
Yeah.
with all of our families. So that might not be me personally anymore, like it was when we had 100 to 150 students, but it's like, the VPs and the teachers, and they know who we are.
Right.
It's not so big that they can't kind of, we're like
Yeah.
inaccessible.
It's not number 3,501, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The thing that I'm very curious about when it comes to online schools is the community element.
Yeah.
Going to high school is like an experience. That's like so ingrained in culture. The high school years, good or bad, or whatever that looks like.
Totally.
So what's that? So how does that work in terms of like does it work the same, or yeah?
You definitely have to put more effort in, for
Okay.
sure.
Right.
We really, I think we've done a really good job of our teachers being connected with their students,
Right.
and where possible, student cohorts who are part of one teacher's caseload, let's say, or one teacher's class, like especially high school. You might be in Mrs. Chen's, math class for high school. So those teachers will have online classes where the other students are aware of the fact that they're not alone. But it's definitely been a bigger challenge to create that sense of community.
Right.
We actually had a really interesting panel at our last Pro D, which was just this August. And again, normally we gather together in person, but this year, COVID, thanks.
Yeah.
Everything had to be online. So we kind of had to think outside the box, like how do we structure our speaker sessions and our learning sessions with our teachers, to make it meaningful. And so we invited 4 of our past students, graduates,
Okay.
to come and do a past Kleos student panel.
Right.
And it was really cool to hear their story about how school was for them. But it was also kind of like this little poignant moment where, they were like, "Hey, I didn't know you were in my class, and hey, can we exchange email addresses, because I want to stay connected with you."
Yeah.
And so, the past year, it's been a growing thing for us, that we've been really looking specifically at how do we build better community in an online way, because our teachers do have really great connections with our students.
Yeah.
And
You say
sometimes,
yourself, you guys are relationship first,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, so that part wasn't in question. I think it's just been a question of the greater sense of community, like connecting students to each other, connecting parents to the wider community, because it can be really isolating to have your student learning from home.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so how are you guys? So you said that's you guys are kind of working towards improving that all the time. Like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, so the past year we've kind of been exploring how could we promote better community within our online school, and we realized that one of the missing pieces was like a, for lack of a better word, I guess, platform where everybody could see like that transparency, like our learning management system, which is essentially a virtual classroom, is great, but it's still just like, it's like logging into one Zoom room. Like, you're just
Yeah.
here, I'm in my Zoom call, and you kind of don't see all the other Zoom calls that are happening.
Yeah.
And so we started to explore what the possibilities were for, and we have a Facebook page, and we have an Instagram page, and we have a blog on our website. But it's like, how do we connect all of that and create like a sense of like there's one place that you go, because not everybody's on Facebook, and not everybody checks the blog.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we landed on Minga, because we were exploring this we were looking at what our options were, and there are, to be fair, lots out there, lots of things, but like my youngest son just graduated from high school, and his school district uses School Messenger, which is an app that's on your phone, but it really is just like attendance and like school-wide announcements. There's no community there. So we looked at all the things. There's so many. There's like Fresh Grade, there's like, and you can leverage whatever you need, but then we were like, yeah, but that's still not right. And then we were like, what about Minga? Like, I've heard about Minga, I know about Minga, but I don't really know what it is. So then, I think that's when we contacted you and said like, hey, can you do a demo?
Yeah, I'm smiling and I'm chuckling just to keep this as genuine as possible, because I did not mean to set up like.
No, I know you didn't, but
that's perfect.
No, but it's for real. Like,
Cool.
No, I know it's like
I had that moment as we were going. I was like, oh, I did not mean that was, but great. Also, we'll take it.
Heat it off.
Yeah, perfect.
No, I know you weren't. You're just like, how did you arrive? But like, legitimately true. We were looking, and so we kind of had explored all the things that are kind of out there, and nothing really kind of like resonated, because it's like you can use social media for your school platform, but it's not designed for a school.
Right.
And then there are platforms that are designed for schools that don't really do what we wanted them to do. Like Fresh Grade, sure, is great if you're using it as like a online portfolio and a communication between teacher and parent and student, that transparency. School Messenger is really just School Messenger, like, my kid is going to be late, and here's my school fees.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But we wanted something that was a little bit more like just bright and inviting, and that is what we saw. Like, it's funny because you did the demo for Sammy and I, and the rest of the team, and we were all like, okay, we were like, where do we sign? Like, should we make the checkout to Minga.com? Like, because it hit all of the things that we wanted, and it's really fascinating to me how parents are just, teachers, for one thing, teachers are using it. There's, they're creating arts clubs and, teacher groups where they're doing like show and tells, and like meetups where, elementary school teachers are, doing online story time with their classes. And, you've got like a high school arts club happening. And I know there's a teacher who's like trying to start like an online choir, basically, like a singing group, a music group. And that just would not have happened before.
Right.
Like, because we were leveraging email, which is great, but, we all know we're buried under an avalanche of emails.
Right.
And so you know, is it important? Like, that's the thing. Parents are opening emails and going like, is this important? Do I need to respond to this?
Hmm.
Oh, it's like an announcement about a club. Like, pff, you
Yeah.
know, and then it's gone. It's not in your mind anymore. So, moving away from just being completely reliant on emails to communicate everything about the school, but also bringing a little bit of fun and like a sense of like connectedness into how we communicate with families about things. So even just silly things, like little things, like having the school calendar live in Minga
Hmm.
rather than them just getting an email alert every time there's a calendar alert.
Right. And so
Has
and so with that, like you feel everyone is more connected. There's an enjoyment element of it, and you don't, as an online school, you don't need to have physical events or all these things that might happen in a brick and mortar school to build a sense of school community.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. I
yeah.
need to. We should put like a little thing at the end, like Michelle is not a paid actor. She a real
She's not
person.
being. This is not a paid endorsement.
This is a real person
This is a real person who really uses Minga.
who really uses Minga and believes in it.
But we're not paying her to use it.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
no, we pay, we paid Michelle to say these things and use it at our
This is a
school.
sponsored ad.
This is a
Bye.
sponsor ad. Well, that's great. Well, that's great. That's like obviously I love hearing that. That's perfect, especially as the person who talked to you about it. This would
Yeah,
have went south if you.
we hate it. You suck, Pete.
You yes, but me specifically me.
Specifically you. It's all your fault.
Where do you get where do you see you guys using it as you move forward?
Yeah, I feel like the sky is the limit. Like we kind of said to our team when we introduced Minga, like we did some demos and we showed them what it could do, and we kind of explained like what the purpose was and how we like the framework that we had decided landed on with your help was, let's use it as a school calendar, let's use it as like a school announcement platform first, and then we can continue to add rich content. And so we just said to our teachers during Pro-D, when we did sort of a bit of a demo slash training session, use your imagination. Like, don't limit yourself by it needs to just be classroom announcements or homework reminders or report card reminders. Like, don't, like, run with it. And so immediately we had teachers going like, oh, can I have a Minecraft club? And we're like, yes. And we had teachers going, oh, can I have like my own homeroom where I invite parents and students and let them know about show and tells or field trips that might be planned, because there are certain cohorts that are local, so they can get together for field trips. And we're like, yes. And so you could see the wheels start to turn pretty much immediately.
Cool.
Yeah, so I feel like the potential is exponential with Minga for us as an online school, because we don't have any other platform that's self-contained where we're inviting, like, you could say to families, hey, we have a Facebook group, you should join it, but we can't really invite them to that.
Right. Yeah.
We can send them a link to it, but whether they join is up to them. Whereas with Minga, we can very purposefully be like, we have all of your email addresses, because, email is kind of part of the thing with an online school.
Yeah.
And we're going to invite you, and we're going to invite you again if you don't. And eventually, like, yeah, so we've got right now, I would say, and this is early stages still, so it's, conservative in the first like 2 months of school, less than 2 months of school. We have more than half, I would say almost close to 3/4 of our families have like bought in already.
Wow.
Yeah.
And mid-October too.
Yeah.
That's great. Have you guys tried Studio yet? Have you been digging into Studio, the Studio feature? It's
I
very
think my VPs have been digging into it because they've been planning to leverage it for some things. But yeah, that's something that is kind of next on the agenda to look at as part of our professional development staff meeting
it's
like
brand
feature.
new, and it's cool,
Yeah.
and it's gonna get cooler.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
like we're loving it so far. Like it really has already. And it's interesting because more so our new families have jumped in with both feet. Like
Right.
they're like, you know, posting pictures of their kids doing cool things, and like they're active. They're like wanting to be part of it. So that to me is a really good sign when you've got new families who are, you know, overwhelmed with the startup of something they've never done before, and they're willing to jump in and do something and be part of something that, you know, yeah, it's a good sign, because typically new parents are kind of like, whoa, deer in headlights, like I'm overwhelmed, there's too much going on. And instead it's the opposite. They're just like, oh, I love Minga, like how do I do more on there?
Yeah, right.
Whoa,
Yeah.
slow down. Also, I have to say, and maybe this is just my jaded, I've been in this for a long time, I'm always hesitant to introduce something new to my staff team,
Right.
right? Because it's like, oh, here's another thing we have to do, or here's another thing we have to use. And so I was like, oh, okay, I think this is a great thing. The admin team thinks it's a great thing. What's the reaction from the teaching staff going to be? Because if there is a tougher crowd out there,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Oh yeah.
It's a tough crowd, right?
Right.
And they were honestly across the board, except for maybe one person who has like a visceral aversion to anything that looks like social media.
Fair.
Everybody was just like, cool, cool. Like, I can't wait to get in there and use it and explore. So to me, that's, again, a telling thing
Yeah.
that they were willing to jump in, because if it had been something that was like that one extra thing that wasn't like usable or beneficial, then trust me, we would have heard about it loudly.
So what did you say? Did it click right away? Oftentimes when because this comes up every time we try and roll out to a new school, right? It's always that exact same thing where you say, like, there's teachers who are just like, I don't need one more thing on my plate. Things are busy enough. I don't know what we're doing new tech. Are we going to switch new tech next year or in 2 years? Am I learning this whole thing and then I need to forget about it and do something else? Well, what was the difference? Or even how did you go about introducing it to your colleagues and your staff?
Well, I think it's that theme of building community has always been a topic of conversation, because, we teach in an online reality. However, nobody goes through doing their education degree thinking, yeah, I'm going to be in front of a computer, like in my home, like designing lessons online and like Zooming with my students, right? Like teachers envision themselves in a classroom with their students face to face. So the teachers that are attracted to, online teaching for various reasons, with our school, it typically tends to be, they really see the potential for their students, and they love the fact that their job is a part of a flexible lifestyle. Like you don't have to show up at a building at 8 o'clock every morning and stay until 3:30 or 4,
Yeah.
which has its appeal. But the one thing that they all would say is missing is that community connection piece. And so introducing something that was going to remove the enormous amount of emails they have to send for some, like there's still stuff you have to email parents, like that's, you're never going to get away from that. But like this, if we can even take like, half of your emails and then turn them into Minga announcements or Minga group announcements, and then you're also creating that sense of community. It really wasn't a hard sell.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, they were pretty excited about the idea, because we experience, I think the world is experiencing a level of email fatigue that we experience normally in online school.
Right.
So if we can cut that down by even a third, we're like, it's great.
Right. You feel that's specific to the online teachers. What about do you have any tips or tricks or encouragements to the the brick and mortar teachers who are like, this is like I'm up in front of typically I'm up in front of a class. Maybe now it's different because all
Yeah.
these teachers are online, especially in the States, right?
Yeah, I think thinking outside the box is key. I think, the framework of a classroom is great in the context of a brick and mortar physical school. But it's not directly transferable. Like you can't take the classroom context framework and directly insert it into an online learning environment. It just, you have to think about it differently.
Yeah.
So, and that there's really no limitation once you get there. You can make it look like so many things. But just, kind of, I always think about it, the lens that you look through. So if the lens that you're looking through is I'm a teacher standing at the front of a classroom and I'm teaching, 25 to 30 kids who are like in desks in front of me, and then you try and look through that lens when you're planning for online learning, it's going to be painful, I think. You have to think about it in a different way. And you have to be willing to give some of it up because you're not going to be able to control it the same way that you do in a classroom. So, but can it be a rich learning environment? Absolutely. Can it be still, relationship based? Absolutely. You just have to change. You have to shift your thinking. It definitely is a paradigm shift.